Hi, everybody. Welcome to part 3 of our interview with Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter Chris Hedges and his new book, America, the Farewell Tour.
And they bought back their own stock, which, because their compensation packages are tied to it. Apple spent $100 billion buying back its own stock. They paid unsustainable debt. And, I don't want to...
So what does that mean to people when they go, they bought back their own stock? Why is that bad? What is that? People listen like, so what? I don't even...
Because it's what Marx called fictitious capital. It's a giant Ponzi scheme. You buy back the stock as if the value of your company is actually worth more. Well, it's only worth more because you were given money by the Fed at 0% interest. And the other thing that they've done is, because it has to be paid back, even though it's 0% interest, is ratcheted up the debt peonage on the American public. So that's where you get $1.5 trillion in student debt. That's where you get 13-some trillion in household debt. That's where you get, if you're late on your credit card, it's 28%. Even if you have insurance, I mean, 1 million people a year in this country who go bankrupt have insurance.
Health insurance.
It's just that there are so many loopholes in the insurance policy that could just slam you with this cost, that cost, this bill, until you can't pay for it. So the situation, I mean, I just read those statistics. So we know economically they're worse than they were before the crash. But the predatory nature now of global capitalism, it's just completely unrestricted. There's no constraints. And Trump is this kind of turbocharged kleptocracy. And that's what the tax cut is. It's just unfettered pillage of the rest of the country. But we know where it's going to go. And this time around, they don't have a plan B. They can't lower interest rates any more than they've already lowered them. And then we're really in for it.
We just had Stephanie Kelton on, and I presented her with that, and she said, "Oh, bankers are creative. They have a lot more." I said, "I thought they can't do anything." She's like, "They'll figure something out." That's what she said. I don't know. It doesn't seem like you're right. It seems like they're out of.
She has faith in bankers.
I don't. I loved how I thought I had it written down here. I'm having a hard time finding it, but the whole point of this show since 2016 is to fight against the narrative that Trump is the problem. Right. And that as soon as we get rid of Trump, everything will be good because Barack Obama was such a nice guy. And what they don't realize is if they did realize what Barack Obama actually did, which was, again, continue the policies of George Bush, made the banks bigger, made the wars more, made the Bush tax cuts permanent. Didn't even have to do that, just could have let them expire. Kicked 5.1 million families out of their houses as he was giving trillions of dollars to the banks. He let the union go away in Wisconsin. So if they knew all those things, that they would go, oh, now I get why we have Trump. But people don't know those things. And you have the way you put it that Trump is not an anomaly, that he is a grotesque visage of a failed democracy.
Yeah. So, I mean, I've covered societies in disintegration, including Yugoslavia.
So that's why you're good at this, I think. You've seen this before.
I've watched it. So the meltdown in Yugoslavia was caused by the financial collapse of Yugoslavia, not ancient ethnic hatreds. And you had, as we do, an ineffectual and finally despised ruling elite that was slick in their language of democracy and inclusiveness and all this kind of stuff, the way Obama was. But with that economic collapse in the late 80s, and this is what terrifies me, is what will happen when our collapse comes. With that economic collapse, the rage at the betrayal across the ruling spectrum saw the Yugoslavs turn to Trump-like figures, crude, vulgar, racist imbeciles who incite violence. Because however uneducated and inarticulate Trump is, that belittling of the Jeb Bushes and the Hillary and Bill Clintons resonates. And in some ways, in a kind of dark way, is even cathartic. Because they hate these people. And they hate them especially not only for what they've done, but how slick they are. How they keep speaking, in tones of reasonableness when their lives have long since stopped being reasonable. And, in this book, the focus of the book is the pathologies that are created by a decayed culture, that the human suffering, it's what Emil Durkheim calls the anomie or the despair that pushes people to engage in self-annihilating activities, heroin, gambling, suicide, hate groups, sexual sadism. I went to San Francisco and hung out with these BDSM cult-like communities. So that's typical. I mean, I studied classics. All of those pathologies were part of the decline of the Roman Empire, the decline of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. That's when societies seize up, when they fall into degeneration. It unleashes what Freud would call them the death instinct, and that's what's happening. And I focused on the pathologies, arguing that until we address the despair, the dislocation, the alienation, until we address that, these pathologies will only get worse, and they find an expression in Trump. And if you can impeach Trump, but unless you confront those pathologies, you're going to get another figure like Trump or worse. And Noam Chomsky argues, probably correctly, that Michael Pence is worse because he comes out of our most authentically fascist movement, which is the Christian right. And I speak as a seminary graduate. I'm not a new atheist. So, and they are fascist. You don't have to go to Harvard Divinity School, as I did, to figure out that Jesus did not come to make you rich. Jesus did not fuse the iconography and language of the state with that of the religion in order to sacralize imperialism and capitalism. And of course, it's a form of magical thinking because it's magic Jesus who's going to, and it gets right back to, it's nothing wrong with the system. I've just got to believe more and give more money to my megachurch pastor who's already a multimillionaire for seed faith and a prayer cloth, and then Jesus will come down and I'll be rich too.
So the Trump supporters were already kind of primed at the pump because their leaders are these kind of hucksters. These religious leaders are all.
There's very little daylight between a megachurch pastor and Donald Trump.
I agree,
except maybe the sexual proclivities of the mega pastors are kinkier.
Yeah. Okay. So here's also from the book. You say, you talk about magical thinking, but there's also magical thinking on the left.
Yeah, that's right.
So, but here's just one. You say capitalism can never be appeased. Liberal reforms are used to stymie resistance, but are later, when things grow quiet, revoked.
Right.
The past examples of labor in the United States, the social reform does not constitute an invasion into capitalist exploitation. Well, I like to read that again. Social reform does not constitute an invasion into capitalist exploitation, but a regulating in order of this exploration in the interest of capitalist society itself. So you're saying social reform is also just like doing the bidding of the establishment?
Well, that's what, Roosevelt said that his greatest achievement was that he saved capitalism.
And people think he was a socialist, but what he did was, so he told the rich people, there's going to be a revolution unless you give them some money, right?
He wrote a letter. I read it. He wrote a letter. I think it's to his brother. This is in his private correspondent, which came out after his death. And he said, we better give up some of our money or we're going to have revolution. He used the word revolution.
And you think we're there again today? I think we are.
Except we don't have the movements. We don't have the progressive movement. We don't have the Wobblies. We don't have the old CIO. We don't have an independent press.
Well, they've been hollowed out.
Yes, we don't, and we don't have the Communist Party. And let's not forget, I'm not a communist, but we have so effectively erased them from our history. There's a reason Paul Robeson and W.E. Du Bois were communists.
We don't even allow people to be environmentalists in this country anymore.
No, they're called terrorists.
Yeah, yes, they are.
Yeah, they're ag-gag laws.
But people don't realize Barack Obama repealed basically habeas corpus, and you talk about this a lot in the NDAA Section 1021, the National Defense Authorization Act. So now, basically, you can be disappeared on the streets of the United States, and people go, "Do you really think that's going to happen, Jimmy?" And I go, "Why do you think they passed the fucking law if they didn't want to use it?"
Well, what do you think happens to poor black people in cities like Chicago? They get disappeared.
They had it in Chicago all the time,
and then they were tortured.
Yes.
It's not just Chicago.
So, again, people don't realize how bad things are, I don't think. Or the people in power, the people that I normally rub shoulders with don't. When I was touring as a comic, just playing clubs, those people knew how bad things were. I saw how bad things were. And you know what I remember, I'll never forget, I did 2 weeks in Winnipeg, which is cold. And, but I immediately noticed, this has got to be, 15 years ago. I immediately noticed that everyone was less tense, like the waitress, the bartender, everybody. And then it took me like a week to figure it out, but nobody was worried about losing their job because their kid had diabetes and they needed to keep their health. They had the same health care as their boss and the guy who owned the club. And so it kind of evened everybody out, which is maybe that's why they have all the guns like Michael Moore was trying to figure out, but not the violence. Maybe because they have a government that actually gives a shit about their well-being. Unlike what we have here is us worshiping the altar of free markets, which I have to remind people, there are no such things as free markets. Markets are created by people who have stuff to sell, and then they rig the rules to favor them, correct?
Right. Comcast.
Yes, Comcast.
Is that an example of the free market? Comcast?
It's super free, and people don't even realize how Al Sharpton got that job. I love that you tell the story. People don't know. That was totally rigged how he got that. And you talk about Jesse Jackson being booed in Ferguson.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that?
Sure, because these young activists, some of whom I interview out of Ferguson, pretty impressive people, they're not buying that black, Glenn Ford calls it the misleadership class, the black misleadership class, like the Jesse Jacksons and others, who made alliances with corporate America and the political structure. I mean, of course, the Clintons in his case, but the young generation's not having it. So both
they did sell out. They the Al Sharptons. I mean, it's
and that's why Al Sharpton and Jesse Jackson were driven out of Ferguson.
Yeah. So Jesse Jackson's over there with a bullhorn screaming, "No justice, no peace," and the people came up to him and said, "Get out of here."
Yeah, or you're going to get hurt.
Or you're going to get hurt.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And he said, that's the problem. We got to come together. And they're like, "No, you're the problem."
Yeah.
Because you sold out to these people. We're supposed to be resisting.
Yeah.
So, so now a lot of people, I think one of the big criticisms of yours coming from the left is that people say, you don't have enough solutions, and that and so that's what people tell me too. They're like, "Oh, you're just crying." But I want to read. You say this is great. Also, so I love this part. You say only when ruling elites become worried about survival do they react. Appealing to their better nature or of the powerful is useless because they don't have one. Oh my God, that's awesome. We once had within our capitalist democracy liberal institutions, the press, labor unions, political third parties, civic and church groups, public broadcasting, well-funded universities, and liberal wing of the Democratic Party that were capable of responding to outside pressure from movements. They did so imperfectly. They provided only enough reforms to save the capitalist system from widespread unrest, or with the breakdown of capitalism in the 1930s from revolution, they never adequately addressed white supremacy, institutional racism, or the cruelty that is endemic to capitalism. But they have the ability to mitigate some of the suffering that plagued working men and women. There was never enough social mobility, but there was some. Public education, including institutions such as the City College of New York, rivaled the private institutions, including prep schools and Ivy League colleges, where the wealthy sent their sons and daughters to be groomed for the plutocracy. These liberal institutions, I spent 248 pages in my book, Death of a Liberal Class, explaining how this happened. These liberal institutions collapsed under sustained assault during the last 40 years of corporate power. They exist now only in name, and they are props in the democratic facade. Liberal nonprofits from MoveOn.org to the Sierra Club are no better. They are feeble appendages to a corporatized Democratic Party. So, well, I'll just go a little bit further. There are, as the political philosopher Sheldon Wolin reminds us, no institutions left in America that can authentically be called democratic. But even more ominously, the militant movements that were the real engines of democratic change have been obliterated by the multi-pronged assault of communist witch hunts and McCarthyism, along with the deindustrialization, a slew of anti-labor laws and deregulation and corporate seizure of our public and private institutions. This has left us nearly defenseless, forcing us to start all over again. And so you go on and then talk about what are we going to need to fight back against these bastards. You talk about how we're going to need to come together with people of political stripes and ideologies that we often find deplorable.
Right.
So so you're saying go ahead. What do you think?
Well, I think it was Lord Salisbury who was a shit, but he said there are no permanent alliances, there are only permanent power.
Right.
We do have to, if you go into a Walmart, and the Walton family is it's out of late monarchical France. It's just they sit around or maybe the Sackler family from Purdue making $11,000 an hour for doing nothing, and having these sophisticated union busting. I'm talking about Walmart.
Yeah.
But if you went to a Walmart, which is hollowed out any small town, including the ones I come from, and you say we're going to organize for a $15 minimum wage and health insurance, you're speaking to the very real economic issues of people who may have voted for Trump or people who may hold opinions and political beliefs that are distasteful to you. But we're going to have to build those alliances because, as you point out, the goal of every ruling elite, especially as you veer towards a crisis, is to keep the working classes not only divided but pitted against each other. In America, that's done usually through race. Even the kind of anti-communist movement was racialized. I spent time with these white militias, the Knights of the Alt-Right, Proud Boys, the Three Percenters. At one point, I was actually around a bonfire in a rural part of upstate New York outside of Binghamton with all of these guys while they were drinking beer, praying to my Presbyterian God that none of them would Google me. But their stories of dislocation are real, and their suffering is real. And when I wrote my book on the Christian right, I came to the conclusion that we're never going to argue these people out of their magical thinking and create. The only way to break the movement is to reintegrate these people back into the society. But we've done the opposite. We've pushed them further and further out. And the further you get pushed out, the harder it is to cope with reality. The more, as a kind of emotional mechanism, you retreat into magical thinking. Anthropologists call it crisis cults, which is kind of what the Christian right is. So in many ways, Trump's magical thinking, Trump's worldview, which is not rooted in verifiable fact, is not an anomaly. Tens of millions of Americans, including all of those in the Christian right, have preceded Trump in stepping into a non-reality-based worldview.
So here's how you put it in the book. You say, When people say, what are you building around? I say, we're building around power. People who understand power tend to have the patience to build a base, do the training, raise the money, so when they go into action, they surprise people. If we are to succeed, we will have to make alliances with people and groups whose professed political stances are different than our own, and at times unpalatable to us. We will have to shed our ideological purity. The legendary organizer Saul Alinsky, whose successor Ed Chambers was Deacon's mentor, argued that the ideological rigidity of the left, something epitomized in identity politics and political correctness, effectively severed the left from the lives of working men and women. This was also during the Vietnam War, when college students led the anti-war protests and sons of the working class did the fighting and dying in Vietnam. The left often dismissed Trump supporters as irredeemable racists and bigots, often ignoring their betrayal and suffering. Condemning all those who support Trump is political suicide. There are no permanent enemies, no permanent allies, only permanent interests, as you already said.
Right. So when I'm in Anderson, Indiana, with all these old UAW workers, GM has moved all the plants to Mexico, where they're paying Mexicans $3 an hour without benefits. So all those union jobs are gone, $20, $35 an hour, with medical benefits and pensions, and you could support a family on one salary and buy a house and send your kid. It's all gone. The city's a wasteland, like all they've actually ripped down the huge GM plants, so they're these massive weed-choked lots. They voted for Sanders in the primary, but they were never going to vote for Clinton in the general election because NAFTA destroyed their lives, the lives of their families, the lives of their communities, and the lives of their children. And
so people don't realize that that's why she lost.
Right.
People really want to say it's racism.
But it's right. And the Democratic Party can't admit it.
They can't do an autopsy on themselves.
No, because it is, if they did an autopsy on themselves, they would have to confront their complicity in creating that system. And in order to fix the system, they could no longer be an appendage of Wall Street and corporate power. Pelosi, Schumer, all of these figures are creations of the oligarchs, creations of Wall Street money. The power of Pelosi and the power of Schumer and the party is that they are the conduits. They funnel that money to the anointed candidates. If we got that money out of politics and had fair elections, these people wouldn't hold power, and they know it. And so they'd rather take the whole thing down than give up their privilege and their status.
So it's exactly the actually opposite of what they argue. They argue that the people who wouldn't vote for Hillary are doing it because of their white privilege, but the reason why they gave us Hillary is because of their white privilege.
Well, and this gets into the whole Clintons who played that card of, dog whistling, ripping apart Jesse Jackson's Rainbow Coalition, going after, was it Sister Souljah?
Yes.
The Law and Order. I mean, look, I teach in a prison. Upwards of at least half or more of my students wouldn't be there but for Bill Clinton. The Democratic Party is not our savior. So there's a lot of people right now claiming that there's going to be a progressive takeover of the Democratic Party. And I try to keep explaining to them that is not happening. I live in the bluest of the blue states. When we had a Democratic takeover of this state, which we have a supermajority, and Jerry Brown is our governor. And guess what we have? We have fracking. We don't have single-payer health care. They gutted net neutrality. We don't know. We don't have a living wage. We also have, as the leader of the Democratic Party, a pharmaceutical lobbyist who we found out they have super delegates on the state level. So this idea that somehow the party is going to, it's not right. Am I wrong about that? Or do you think that it's because people say it's too hard to start a third party. Well, how hard do you think it is to reform the Democratic Party? I worked for Ralph Nader. They make it hard. They were terrified of Nader after 2000.
He was filling stadiums like Bernie, too.
Yeah, but he didn't have the money. Everybody had to pay $5. That's the only way he paid it off.
Right.
Like Madison Square Garden. Yes, he was. And yeah, they make it hard. I know. I watched it up close. But that's because they have their, their fingers around the ring, and they're not going to let go unless we make them let go. Look, Syriza, which ruling Greece, Cyprus, kind of sold out. But nevertheless,
So they were nowheres.
They were 4%. They were polling 4% 10 years ago. And
so they were the equivalent of the Green Party in Greece.
Yeah, except that was a functional party, unlike our Green Party.
Right.
So, I mean, my problem with Bernie Sanders is that we're not going to create a so-called political revolution in an election cycle, and we're not going to do it within the confines of the Democratic Party. And you could see it. So he could pull 10,000 people. But once he endorsed Hillary Clinton, went out on the campaign, he was getting 100. He was lucky to get 100 people.
He went right back down to 100 people.
Yeah. And so the day that he endorsed Hillary, Cornel West and I were helping to lead a march of homeless people on the appropriately named Wells Fargo Center in Philadelphia, where the Democratic convention was being held. And afterwards, Cornel and I drove home to Princeton, and we were listening to Bernie Sanders' endorsement speech. And Cornell said, I think quite presciently, he missed his historical moment.
Oh, boy.
You know, what would Eugene V. Debs have done? Endorsed Hillary Clinton?
Jesus Christ.
And I think that's right. He should have walked out. But he didn't. I mean, he did correctly assess, because I asked him. I talked to him before he announced. And I asked him why. Shama Sawan and I were with him. Why wouldn't he run as an independent? And he said because he didn't want to end up like Ralph Nader. Well, he's not wrong. They would have done everything they could to destroy him.
They did anyway.
Well, and with yes, and well, this is his folly.
Yeah.
And with Debs, Wilson threw him in prison.
Yes.
But this is, if you really truly confront, these people are vicious, they're cruel, they're immoral, they're consumed by all of the pathologies of psychopaths and inability for remorse, unbridled narcissism, a lust for power. I mean, they got it all. And I don't say that from a distance, because as a 10-year-old, I got a scholarship. I was one of 16 scholarship kids at one of these elite boarding schools. I grew up with these people.
The rich, you mean?
Yeah, including people like Louis Scooter Libby and stuff. I mean, these are classmates of mine.
Yeah.
So I know them. And they're even creepier in person than they are at a distance. And they're not going to let go, and they're going to play dirty. I mean, there's not going to be anything civil about this fight to wrest power from these people. But if we don't wrest power, it's not just what they're going to do to us. It's what they're going to do to the biosphere and the ecosystem in the name of short-term profit, which is destroy it and extinguish the possibility of human life.
So so much. So when Bernie Sanders, I can play videotape after videotape of him decrying the two-party system, and for him saying that there has to be a rainbow coalition and it has to happen outside the Democratic Party, and the whole reason why he's not doing that is because
of his career, because he wants to keep his seniority within the Democratic Party. He does not want to be seriously challenged for a Senate seat in Vermont. And he doesn't want to be a figure of ridicule within the corporate press, and he's not wrong. That's exactly what would happen.
Yeah, but who cares about all that stuff?
He obviously cares, which is why...
That's what kills me. Like, I thought he...
Well, that's the difference between him and Ralph Nader. I mean, I love Ralph. I just talk to him. I talk to him all the time, and I remember somebody saying something about, destroying his legacy, and he said, what are they going to do? Take seatbelts out of cars? Yeah.
So, I know you have to go. It's 3:00. So, do you have any... I mean, it's a great book. I want to tell people the book is just America, the Farewell Tour. And it just put words to all the stuff that I had seen.
Can I read? Do I have time to read?
You have all the time in the world.
I've just got to speak in L.A. I can't be late. So
I hear you.
Fun. So I love this passage. I didn't even write it. So, I mean, it's Irving Howe, the great critic, writing about the Snopeses.
Yes.
So
yes, the Snopeses.
It kind of gets where we are. So this is initially me. When a tiny cabal seizes power, monarchist, communist, fascist, or corporate, it creates a mafia economy and a mafia state. Mm-hmm. Trump is not an anomaly. He is the grotesque visage of a collapsed democracy. Trump and his coterie of billionaires, generals, half-wits, Christian fascists, criminals, racists, and moral deviants play the role of the Snopes clan in some of William Faulkner's novels. The Snopeses filled the power vacuum of the decayed South and ruthlessly seized control from the degenerated former slaveholding aristocratic elites. Flem Snopes and his extended family, which includes a killer, a pedophile, a bigamist, an arsonist, a mentally disabled man who copulates with a cow, and a relative who sells tickets to witness the bestiality, are fictional representations of the scum now elevated to the highest level of the federal government. They embody the moral rot unleashed by unfettered capitalism. The usual reference to amorality, while accurate, is not sufficiently distinctive and by itself does not allow us to place them as they should be placed in a historical moment, the critic Irving Howe wrote of the Snopeses. Perhaps the most important thing to be said is that they are what comes afterwards, the creatures that emerge from the devastation with the slime still upon their lips. Let a world collapse in the South or Russia, and there appear figures of coarse ambition, driving the way up from beneath the social bottom, men to whom moral claims are not so much absurd as incomprehensible, sons of bushwhackers or musics drifting in from nowhere and taking over through the sheer outrageousness of their monolithic force. They become presidents of local banks and chairmen of party regional committees, and later, a trifle slicked up, they muscle their way into Congress or the Politburo. Scavengers without inhibition, they need not believe in the crumbling official code of their society. They need only learn to mimic its sounds.
Wow, that's great writing, and that's where we are, and that's amazing. Wow. What, you know, so what would you like to, how would you like to end this interview? Let me ask you, because I have no idea. I'm not a good interviewer. So what would be, you're probably better than me. So what would be a good way for me to end this interview?
Well, I just think people have to give up the false hope that any institution within the system, and we are at a moment in climate change alone, which can appropriately be described as an emergency, as the greatest existential crisis facing the human species. And we have no time left. We have to react. And these elites will drive us over the precipice. They are so stupid, so blind, so self-consumed. I mean, they all think they're going to go off to bunkers, $1 million bunkers in Utah, and survive when the rest of us won't. They should read a little history because their guards in total chaos will off them in a minute. I saw that in Yugoslavia. We have to overthrow this system. We have to begin to think in revolutionary terms. These people have to go because we can't afford to endure much more of their destruction, not only what they're doing to human beings, but the ecocide that they are carrying out. And even the quote-unquote enlightened elites like Jerry Brown are not, they're greenwashing this problem. And if you doubt me, you should read these climate change reports, which I do, and they're very depressing because the constant theme of every report is that it's happening far faster than we predicted. We weren't too pessimistic. We were far too optimistic. And the reason climate scientists are terrified of getting above 2 degrees Celsius is because of feedback loops. And they know from studying climate conditions on planets like Venus, which once had lots of water and now is 800 degrees, that once these feedback loops, there's start. And this means that this climate, this deterioration, the absence of the polar ice caps raises the sea levels, acidify. I mean, there's no way you can control it. And that's where we're headed. And if I do have kids, and I wouldn't give one of mine away, and I don't, I may fail. We may fail. I think the hardest thing for those of us who are realists to do is face the bleakness of what's before us and rise up anyway. But I want my kids to say that he tried. And I do come out of a position of faith, not in any kind of orthodox way. but I believe we have a moral responsibility to resist and fight against radical evil. I don't know if we're going to survive as a species, but I know that these corporate forces have us by the throat, and they have my children by the throat. And in the end, I don't fight fascists because I'll win. I fight fascists because they are fascists.
Chris Hedges, fantastic. Please make sure you're subscribed. Even if you think you are subscribed, there's a good chance you're not. So please check. It only takes a second. And then click that bell. And that's how you know you'll get a notice every time we drop a video. They still won't notify you every time we drop a video, but that's the best we can do. Plus, if you like the show, you want to support it, please become a patron. We give you hours of bonus material every week. And come see a live show. Go to jimmydorecomedy.com for our live schedule.